tuned to the Human Frequency on American Freedom Radio. We are back. We really wanted to be here last week, but we were traveling, and today is November 23rd, and we were going to talk all about our on-the-road experiences last week, and we're going to do it this week. Last week, on Wednesday, we found ourselves in a town called Fairfield, California, and we were looking for a place to broadcast live. We thought we might get a hotel. We thought maybe we would do it from a Starbucks. We were up in the air and really looking forward to doing an on-the-road episode. But what ended up happening was around 5 p.m., it looked like it wasn't going to happen. Then we finally were finding a part of town that had a hotel. And I couldn't even get to the hotel before I had to use the restroom. So we went to Subway. And I went into Subway and I said, hey, can I please use the restroom? And the woman looked kind of horrified and said, no. And I said, well, I know I'm not a customer, but I'm kind of desperate. And she said, there's someone in there and you don't want to go in there. And I got the picture. And
you just had the tuna sandwich, the 12-inch with extra mayonnaise, and you don't want to go in there.
Well, she didn't go that far, but she looked pretty horrified at whatever was going on in that bathroom. We went back out onto the street, drove down a little ways. It looked a little seedy. We pulled into the Econo Lodge, which was literally the only motel or hotel around that we could see. Went in and we were like, okay, we'll get a room here. We'll do our show out of this Econo Lodge. And we went into the front office and the clerk there was standing behind a glass wall. And I said, what's this? Is this bulletproof glass? And this is after he quoted us $75 for the room. And he says, yes, it is. I said, okay, we're out of here. And so we decided we weren't going to broadcast from the Econo Lodge. So then we went down to the Starbucks, and the Starbucks closed at 7, so it was a no-go. So we will be talking all about our awesome on-the-road experiences this week, having gotten a little bit of rest, because gifting, to the extent that we were for the last week, is truly exhausting.
Mm-hmm. It certainly is. And when you're on, like you said, for that period of time, you really begin to feel it after a while.
You do. We were gifting for days and days on end, all the way from California into Oregon. And when you're throwing that much orgonite and doing planetary healing on that scale, you feel like you're the white blood cells of the earth, like the antibodies trying to clean up the illness, and the illness being the parasitic infection. So the earth is an organism like we are, and she is very, very badly infected.
And very large, too. So
she's
it's
a very large woman.
You get rid of one illness here, and then you got to go way over here and then take care of that one. And then there's one way back here again. So it's a lot of work.
We need more antibodies. We need more white blood cells. It means we need more volunteers, more people to help.
But those volunteers do not necessarily have to integrate with one another because, as we've seen, some white blood cells are not white blood cells. They are, in fact, pathogens posing as white blood cells. So
be careful.
Be careful. There are saboteurs out there, and there are many, because this work was suppressed 60 years ago, and it's still suppressed today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we need to improve the immune system of our world. That is what we are doing. So the more people that help, the better it is. And anytime you help, you are doing a world of good, because it only takes a small amount of good to undo so much evil. And we had an amazing journey. This was the largest scale gifting we've ever done. And it was the largest distance we've ever gone on a gifting trip, which is nice because now we have a car where we could do that. So that was always an issue for us before, was transportation.
And by the way, that car was made possible by generous donations from people that have helped us in the last several months. Well, really, more than the last several months, just from the beginning, really.
Yeah.
And also from people buying our orgonites on our online shop and at our events in person.
Mm-hmm.
So
we thank you.
We thank you, all of you. You know who you are.
Yeah, we thank you very much. It's been a lot of help for us, and we've been feeling a lot of support, which is great, because I often go through periods of time where I'm getting lots of attacks and lots of trolls and shills and people online sending me hate. And so it's always nice to remember that there's more love than hate, and that it is stronger.
Online trolls, who would have thunk?
Yeah. Well, we were traveling through Central California on the first day of our journey, which was Thursday morning, and we drove up into Bakersfield, and on the way into Bakersfield, we saw very unusual skies and a very different kind of fog. And this looked like something that we had seen online. On Wikipedia, they called it Thule fog. they have a name for this fog. I'm not sure if that's what it was, but it was very unusual.
Yeah, Wikipedia has a name for everything.
Well,
it's not
science.
always the correct name.
Well, I'm not sure what this fog was, but to me it looked like DOR, deadly orgone radiation, and it was hovering all around us. And, as much gifting as we've done out there, it's such a heavily bombarded area with the geoengineering and the cell towers. We've done a lot of work, but it still needs so much more.
Valleys often are heavily targeted in that manner.
Mm-hmm. We drove up through there, and it was pretty weird. But as we went, we were seeing the things we usually see, which is some light chemtrails. Mostly the skies were okay, but it was more like a smoggy haze, the DOR haze. And we drove up to Stockton. And this is where things got really, really interesting.
Well, certainly. And, Sharon, the really unique thing about this gifting, or at least the opening leg of it, was the fact that we were going through territory that we had already gifted previously. Mm-hmm. So we were we had more of that ability to observe things rather than be constantly scanning the landscape for towers.
Right. We had gifted that area already. So we were driving up north, and the Central Valley is what it is. It's sort of dreary. It's flat. It's desolate. And it is deserty. I mean, we're growing food there, but it's a desert environment. But as we started to get closer and closer to Stockton, I noticed changes in the landscape that were interesting. The grass was starting to get greener. And at this time of year, there really isn't much green grass yet in California because it's before the rainy season. It's just starting now. The rainy season is just getting kicked off, but there was already green grass. And so we drove farther north, and I saw the DOR in the distance, the smog, and I saw some chemtrails sticking out of it. As we got closer to Stockton, I noticed all of the smog and the chemtrails dissipating and funnel-shaped clouds, which are an indication of high orgone. And I can tell you this was not our work. This was someone else's because we had just gifted along the freeway. This is the work of NorCal Weather Warrior. This is a lady that is up in Stockton and doing great work with gifting the entire county. She's gone everywhere, and she's got a blog on Tumblr, norcalweatherwarrior.tumblr.com. I was very, very impressed, and it was very exciting to see someone else doing the work and seeing the results. The skies were very different from what we had seen in the southern part of the Central Valley. There were distinct transmutations. It was distinctly, there were the funnel clouds, there were the little clumpy white clouds that come when the pollution is moved out, and the sky was very blue. Mm-hmm. And in the city of Stockton, I have never seen it so rich and green grass everywhere. It was a very nice looking city, and I don't want
enjoyable to be moving through there.
And I don't want to be unfair to Stockton, but that city has always seemed dreary to me. And so has Sacramento. And both of these places on this trip, for the first time ever in my life of living in California, traveling up and down that 5 freeway over and over again, for the first time ever, both Stockton and Sacramento looked really nice.
Yeah,
and pleasant.
And those two cities are fairly close together, so we were able to see some of the same things in Sacramento, just north of Stockton, that we had seen moving through that place. So that was fun to watch, and we continued after that point, and once we hit Sacramento, we had to start gifting again because we were covering some new territory.
Mm-hmm. I just want to remind you again, just look up norcalweatherwarrior.tumblr.com because it's really wonderful to see others that are doing this work, especially going really in depth in places that need it so much.
And that's all one word, norcalweatherwarrior.tumblr. That's Tumblr with no E, TUMBLR.com.
And I hope NorCal Weather Warrior is listening tonight because we want to thank you for the work you've done up there. And also you could check our blog, thekembo.tumblr.com. And we've also documented the different cities and towns we went through and the different skies we saw. Consistent results everywhere we went, but more about that later. We continued up north past Sacramento, and those transmutations continued, and the green grass was continuing. And
they sure did.
And we drove into Redding that day, past Redding, actually.
Well, before we got to Redding, something very typical happened.
The psychic attack.
Yep.
Yeah.
It happens to every gifter. Ask anyone who's worked with orgone energy or gifted orgonite in any capacity, and they'll tell you psychic attacks. As soon as you start working with it, the psychic attacks begin. And
yep.
And it's really it's something that you have to expect going into it, and not think that, they couldn't hurt me. I mean, they'd never break me. But it happens, and you find yourself just in an agitated state, or maybe you have a really pounding headache, or you're frustrated, or if you're with someone, you're yelling at them and they're yelling back at you, and it seems like there's no reason for any of this nonsense to be happening.
We were yelling at each other.
Oh, yeah.
And we had a fight, and it was a fight over nothing. And then, of course, we recognized it. And there's a couple things you need to do when this happens. So if you're out orgonite gifting, and all of a sudden you have one of these attacks happen, recognize that it's an attack. Because if you're getting angry out of nowhere, there's a reason for it. So when you recognize it, it's easier to diffuse it, because then you say, oh, it's not me. There's something happening here.
I wonder if our listeners are having a hard time racking their brains around the concept of you and me fighting.
Well, no, it happens. We spent a lot of time together, but it's also confirmation you're doing the right thing if they're attacking you, because we're dealing with parasitic entities here, and this is so much more than just weather warfare. This is a battle for the consciousness of humanity. And when you're out there on the front lines and you're throwing orgonite to neutralize deadly energy sources, you really are taking down that false power structure. And it sounds grandiose. Maybe it sounds like an exaggeration, but it really isn't. Each one of us who does this is piece by piece dismantling that false power structure. And they really, really hate that. So they will attack. So we did have that happen out there. And, I got to say that out in the Central Valley, they've got a lot of DOR sources and a lot of towers. And it's really easy for them to do that kind of thing. It's happening.
Even when your cell phone is off and wrapped in foil. And even when you have anti-surveillance devices.
Which we do, but it's just going to happen sometimes.
It is.
So it's to be expected.
And it's all in how you deal with it, because they're trying to get a certain reaction out of you, and it's never a good one. But yeah, those 2 points are very good. You have to acknowledge it. That helps immediately. That helps to diffuse it. And then, yeah, like any other confirmation that you get, it's not just the funnel shapes in the sky, but you also know that they're freaking out because they don't want you to bust those towers, but you're doing it anyway.
Well, I noticed that as we went north, we left very early so that we would have daylight to do this, because it's winter now, but or almost winter. Up in Redding, the energy kind of shifted a little bit, and Redding is a strange place too, and we've had some history there, what with Dane Wigington and the event last year. People are still asking me about Dane Wigington. We got into it. I mean, he called me last year. It was August of 2015, and he said, if you come up here to my event in Redding and distribute orgonite flyers or orgone energy flyers, you will be removed by the police. And we did it anyway. And then, of course, when we went up there, we handed out a bunch of flyers.
It's just informative flyers, just little pieces of paper,
Yeah, again, I probably shouldn't have called our flyer distribution Occupy Geoengineering Watch. That might have rubbed them wrong. But we were very peaceful. We were just handing out flyers. They did kick us out. I did go peacefully. I'm not looking for trouble. I just wanted to spread information.
And this is also before we were in compliance.
Right. So now we couldn't even go to jail or anything. But as it is, there is some history in Redding, and there is some bad energy going on up there. And who knows what kind of mind control he's under. He's not helping out at all with solutions. He's just keeping people in the darkness. So
in the fear matrix, which is where the parasites want people to be.
But I noticed Redding had a different kind of energy. And warmer temperatures. We did notice warmer temperatures all of a sudden.
Because I was watching the temperatures as we came up. They were mostly in the high 60s, but there was about 80 or 82.
Or so the temperature gauge on the Prius said.
Yes, which is known to be suspect.
But it was warmer, and the energy was a little strange. I had a really terrible cup of tea from a donut shop. And anyway, we did some more tower busting in Redding. We were really happy to move on from there.
I was really absorbed in the document, the little poster on the wall that pointed out the difference between a crawler and a bear claw. So
I guess Redding was not that eventful this time as it was last year when we got kicked out of the event. And
I got a not so good beverage when we were in Fairfield, but I'll talk about that later.
Well, it's really hard to find healthy foods and drinks on the road. That was one of our big challenges on this trip.
$3.50 for a chai latte? I mean, come on.
Well, it's a real challenge when you're out on the road, and the whole GMO situation. By the end of the trip, I wasn't as well as I usually am. But
same with me.
As we went up north, I would say that things got more, the energy got a little lighter again around Mount Shasta, because there was that energy field of the mountain, and we saw the lenticular clouds, which is always an indication of high orgone. And in this region, it's being produced by the mountains. It's being produced by the earth. And, throwing the orgonite helps, but it's already such a high orgone region. So we saw some really spectacular lenticular formations. I posted pictures on my blog. You can check it out. And
well, we have a theory about lenticular clouds, is that they might only be the reaction of the bombardment that's going on, the parasitic bombardment, because it's not just, we see that they don't just form over mountains, but they form in the presence of the energy that combats those pollutants. So it is both.
Well, yeah, they only form over mountains in nature. They form in high orgone areas, like anywhere that's been newly gifted. We've had them form over our house before when we were first experimenting around. But what the lenticular cloud is it's a round UFO-shaped cloud, and it happens because of the scalar wave vortex, which is the spiraling energy, which comes off of the orgonite devices. And it's literally the collection of all the geoengineering toxins in this funneling, spiraling vortex. And so I was wondering if we'd even see lenticular clouds if they weren't bombarding with geoengineering. That is something that I'd like to see as we continue to clean the atmosphere. I'd like to see what happens with the lenticular clouds.
Yeah, it's a thought, and time will tell on that one.
But they're pretty common up there because of the mountains, so much so that I was able to buy a few greeting cards at the Black Bear Diner in Wairika that had lenticular clouds. So we know that's a natural formation that happens up there. But that was not even the most exciting part of the trip. That happens once we got into Oregon. But we were traveling up north. We went through Weed, California, and everybody likes to stop in Weed. California loves weed.
That's right.
California loves weed so much so that it's now legal statewide, even for those who are out of compliance and haven't registered their legal names. You all can smoke pot in California now legally, and you don't need a doctor's note.
But don't smoke that pot before you try and go register your legal name. That's not going to end well.
So yeah, that was, that first day we stopped in Wairika, had a pretty terrible dinner at the Black Bear Diner. See, the GMO situation on the road is really bad.
It really is.
It's really, really terrible.
By the way, I just want to say, we drove over Lake Shasta on a causeway, we don't have a hovercraft. We drove over Lake Shasta, and we gifted it because we noticed that the lake levels were low.
Well, I hope that this gifting helps with bringing more rain and snow. It already has.
It's a continuing process, and we needed to get, this was new gifting area for us, so it will help. We will see over time what that does, but yeah, the GMO situation on the road
it's bad.
I mean, we tried. We really did try. We tried to eat healthy when we could. We tried to avoid the many things that have to be avoided when you're on the road like that. But it seemed like even the healthy stuff that we tried to gravitate to, it wasn't cutting the mustard.
Everything's been tainted. Everything's been weaponized. Our food has been weaponized. So if you're not in your home environment with your usual comforts in your grocery store where you know what the organic non-GMO foods are, it's really, really complicated on the road. And the best we could do in Wairika, where we stopped for the night, and it was a nice place to stop and relaxing and everything, but the Black Bear Diner was what was there, and the best we could do was a giant salad. It was like a chef salad with tuna, but everything, tuna is not very good for you, but it was literally the only salad that was a meal on the menu. And it was just, it lacked nutrition. Even if it's just vegetables, it lacks nutrition. These non-organic vegetables, they're like factory farm vegetables.
Yeah, you can tell eating it that it's just like, this not only doesn't taste as well as it should, but you can sense that you're just not getting nutrition from it. Yeah,
I feel like the nutrition's been removed from all the food.
I can't explain it. It's just something that you sense.
Well, it's grown with pesticides, it's commercially produced, mass produced. It's just not made with love. It's not grown with love, and it's not grown in a healthy way. They're using chemical fertilizers, and most of these foods are actually not GMO. There's only a few crops that are, but everything is sprayed with pesticides, so you're dealing with that.
Right.
So I didn't feel good after that dinner like I wanted to. And over every single table was a CFL light bulb, a compact fluorescent light bulb. It was blinding. It was glaring. It gave me a headache. I unscrewed our light bulb.
Well, you had to unscrew it maybe just like a quarter turn so that it would stay in the fixture, but it wouldn't fall out and spill mercury all over the table,
Well,
which is always a risk with those things.
yeah, it did make it easier to unscrew it, but yeah, you got to be really careful with the CFL bulbs. That place was so toxic, and I had been to that Black Bear Diner in Wairika several times over the years, and just traveling through, and I don't know, it just seems more toxic now than it was. Those CFL bulbs weren't there in the 90s, and back then there weren't as many GMO foods. So things just keep getting
And not as
more
many
toxic.
cell towers.
No, things just keep getting more toxic. So that's why we're doing this work. The trip, I think, got much more interesting once we got into Oregon. And that next morning, this is where we were in all new territory. We've never thrown orgonite in Oregon before. And my prediction for Oregon was that it would have more cell towers than we'd ever seen anywhere. And it did live up to that prediction because it is ground zero in the weather war. I thought that was California. Turns out that the Pacific Northwest is the highest concentration of cell phone towers, and they're blocking all those storms from coming into California. So people get really caught up on the chemtrailing over the ocean, but the main thing that is keeping precipitation from coming into the state is the wall of cell towers on the coast. So that's what we were tackling on this trip was Oregon cell towers.
Yeah, and now that that wall of cell towers has been neutralized, which we will talk about later in the show, now that that act has been done, you will start to see not just more of the storms coming into California, but the weaker ones that are both early and late in the rainy season that they previously could suppress, they will not be able to suppress anymore. And we've already seen that. We've already gotten 2 major rains since we returned from this trip. And again, very early in the rainy season. So we'll see what that leads to later on.
Well, we drove up from Wairika into Oregon. It wasn't that far into Oregon, and we went to Ashland for breakfast. And as we drove in, the morning skies were already transmuting from the orgonite throwing of the day before. And I do believe that the mountainous region there has something to do with that too, because the earth heals herself. So we're just kind of helping her. We're not the saviors of the earth or anything. I'm not claiming I'm not making any claims here. All I'm doing is helping her do what she needs to do.
And everyone's looking for a savior, which is not the right thing to be doing, if I may say so. We just all have to do our part, and we've pointed out for people what they need to do, which is neutralize the cell phone towers with orgonite. It's excruciatingly simple.
Well, yeah, it is. It just
difficult
it sounds
at the
too
same
simple.
time.
It sounds too easy to be true. But when we drove into Ashland, I noticed that there were I was very surprised by this very overt giant tree stumps, like what we talked about in the episode about there are no forests on Earth. There were huge tree stumps in Ashland, and it was very disturbing. I'd never noticed them before, and I'd been through that area. And this kind of went along with the deforestation that's going on in Oregon now. So there's this previous deforestation of the ancient giant trees, and now the human beings are copying with the parasites. Whatever beings or entities took down those giant trees, it seems that they've programmed us to do the same, or we've learned from them. So that was one of the big problems that I started seeing in Southern Oregon. Although I liked Ashland. I thought the energy there was a little lighter than other parts of Oregon. We had good food, finally a healthy meal, finally vegetarian options. And it felt okay there.
And didn't have to pump our own gas.
Yeah. But the energy was better, but the giant tree stumps were disturbing. I doubt that anybody sees them unless they've seen the film There Are No Forests on Earth. And
well, if we hadn't seen that film, chances are
they
would have
noticed
passed us by too. Yeah,
because you think they're just rocks, then you look at them and they are obviously stumps. When we went into Oregon, we noticed, besides the deforestation, a real increased police presence, and you could feel it. If you're energetically sensitive or empathic, you could totally feel that increased police force in Oregon, a very authoritarian feeling when you enter the state. And I remember in the past, when I first moved up there back in 2001, I was just driving up there to check it out, and I got a speeding ticket in Southern Oregon, and the cops are very much on the prowl. You see them everywhere trying to pull people over. So it's kind of a weird vibe with the cops. But we're in compliance. They can't really do anything with us. But it still doesn't feel good. I don't want to get into it.
We don't want to have to explain to some hillbilly cop No offense, if any cops are watching. Uh, we don't want to explain to any of these people what our situation is and have to show them the paperwork. And like you said, Sharon, we're on limited time because it's winter hours, so we have to be on the road for when there's daylight.
Well, I just don't want to get into it with the police, but I did feel that presence. So we were very, very careful when throwing orgonite. You always have to watch out and make sure that no one's seeing you do it. And if one car behind you has seen you throw a few, you generally want to try to let them pass you so they don't see you throw a few more because they think you're a litter bug. And I did get the stink eye hardcore from one driver in Oregon that thought I was a litter bug. He pulled up next to us. I was sitting in the passenger seat throwing, and he glared at me like venomous anger. And I actually held up the Towerbuster. I said, "We're tower busting. Look, it's orgonite." He just kept glaring. So
in one ear and out the other.
Well, people think you're a litter bug, so you have to keep it on the down low. And if someone sees you do it, don't let them see you do it too many times. But Southern Oregon, this is where I think it got interesting because I'm starting to see really that parasitic infection in a new kind of a way. And I thought it was bad in California. It is really, really bad in Oregon.
We saw it in several ways, too. It wasn't just the cell towers.
The deforestation.
It was the deforestation. It was the stumps.
First the giant stumps, and then all the little stumps. All those huge, acres and acres of trees that they're just clear cutting.
The deforestation was unreal. You had been through there, like, more recently than I have, so...
Well, I lived in Oregon. I lived in Oregon from 2001 to 2009. And the clear cutting has always bothered me. And they do it a lot in Southern Oregon, particularly. And along the coast, there's a lot of places where they're doing it. But what I noticed this time was that it had spread. And places that I had seen forested in the past were now just devoid of trees. It looks like California. It looks like Northern California, those rolling hills with just a few trees on them, and all the evergreen trees get taken out. It's very upsetting to see it, especially if you remember what Oregon looked like before that. So for me, it was pretty emotional, and it's the kind of thing that makes you mad because there are so many reasons we don't need to cut down trees.
Yeah.
And
let me just go on record here and completely debunk as much as I hate the word debunk, I have to debunk this absurd, ridiculous, and erroneous notion that we need paper. We need more paper products. Complete malarkey. And I have just two words to say that will immediately put to an end this argument forever. One of them is hemp. The other word is bamboo. There you go. Enough said.
Well, you can make a lot of things without using trees, hemp paper. But I think that maybe now that marijuana is becoming legal, maybe hemp will be more accepted. But who knows? The deforestation to me did not seem to have anything to do with how much wood we actually need. You never know. Maybe with all these Agenda 21 developments going in, they need more wood. Maybe they have a reason for it. But to me, the pace was so accelerated. It seemed like they were on a mad rush to remove as many trees as possible. I've never seen anything like it in my life. And yes, you can make paper products with hemp. You can make flooring with bamboo. These are renewable resources. They grow way faster than trees. And nowadays, people are reading their news online. People are opting for paperless billing. There's less use of paper than when I lived in Oregon, or there should be less use of paper. There's no reason for this level of deforestation.
The destruction really does smack of the destruction of the ancient trees. Mm-hmm. And we to see both firsthand, to see the stumps and then see the leveled forests with the miniature stumps basically right next to it. It was very emotional for both of us.
Oregon is really troubled. I mean, I lived there for many years and I experienced it. And at the time, it was so confusing to me because I wasn't aware of the issues I'm aware of now. So to me, it was just mysterious. Why are people being so crazy? Why are they destroying everything in sight? And then in the city, it was like, why are the bicyclists suppressing the motorists? I didn't really understand Agenda 21 at that time. I'd wonder, why are they putting in these high-rise developments and blocking people's views of the trees and the hills and the river? It never made sense to me because I didn't know about the parasitic influence. So I didn't know about Agenda 21 or any of that. But the problem is, I think with the deforestation, is the people really don't think they could do anything about it. And I know for sure when I was a voter in Oregon, which I used to believe in.
My condolences.
I've always voted for things like preserve the Tillamook forest. And that got turned down. How can the voters turn down preserving the Tillamook forest? It's a thing of beauty, but everything like that got voted down because the lumber industry is so big there and it employs so many people that they're just desperate and they want their jobs and they want to feel secure and that they could feed their families. But what I see is that the rural people in Oregon are very oppressed. There's a very sad energy. They have no confidence. They have no ambition. They don't feel like they have any choices. And it's not necessarily their fault, but they're not taking personal responsibility and they're not recognizing their personal power. So they feel like this is the only thing they can do. There's one industry, and that's lumber. There's nothing else there in Southern Oregon. It's just trees. So they cut them down they work for scraps so that they can live in a tiny shack with their family and shop at Food for Less or whatever. And it's just really sad. I don't know how to help people out of that cycle except to just gift orgonites to turn the energy, because I feel like if one person just suddenly had an awakening moment and said, you know what, I'm not going to cut down any more trees so this guy can get rich and I can live in my tiny house and barely be able to feed my family. They're destroying their environment and they're living on scraps.
Yeah.
It's madness.
And the thought process is, I don't need to do this anymore. There are options. There is an alternative to the way I've been doing things. And that's what taking personal responsibility is all about. But, I feel that the worst part of what we saw was the fact that people just do not understand that trees are living beings. They are. They are living beings. And we passed plenty of patches where they had the sign up that stated the year that they did the replanting and the trees are coming along well. That's still no reason to cut down trees that have been there for decades or centuries. There's no reason to do that. And that lack of basic understanding of plant life just leads to so much destruction.
Well, the trees have consciousness and they have their own way of communicating. They have a society. We talked about this a little bit on one of the No Forest episodes, I think the one with David Weiss and Rhonda Fairman. And the trees, they have a way of communication. They have a whole network set up. There's the mother trees, and then they communicate with the younger trees. And as trees are dying, they're communicating with the other trees. It's to just go and level an entire swath of trees, just take down hillsides and hillsides of trees. It's like genocide. And
we don't even need it. We don't even need this.
It's not being done because we need it. It's being done as pure destruction. It's being done as it's part of the parasitic infection of our earth. Because if we weren't parasitically infected, we would just be using renewable resources like hemp and bamboo and going paperless more and trying to save paper. I diligently recycle every scrap of paper. I'm very, very conscious of my paper usage. And I don't think that people understand that very much. I think they don't see the trees as a being as important as you or I. And the thing with the trees is they can't defend themselves.
That's right.
So this was very difficult for me to see because I had left Oregon in 2009, and coming back, I see the state destroying itself.
I saw the same thing too. And I'm not a tree hugger, by the way. My arms hug mostly humans. I will say that. And besides, most of the mainstream environmental movement has been completely sabotaged anyway, and it's just being used to further agendas like Agenda 21.
Well, this is the problem, is that we're looking at the total destruction of our Earth, and meanwhile the UN and the governments say, we're going to help you save your Earth, by implementing these new laws, and those laws hurt us and they don't save the earth.
No, they
So
hurt
if-
the earth more.
Agenda 21 hurts the earth because Agenda 21 mandates that we need to put in high-rise developments everywhere. What about the buildings that were already there? How is tearing down the buildings that were already there and putting in new high-rises good for the earth? Using more resources when we already have everything we need in our cities. It's total farce. So I could go on and on about that.
Yeah.
We're going to get more
Well,
into
that's-
Agenda 21 when we get into Portland, because Portland is Agenda 21 Central.
Well, before we get to Portland, we had to go through Southern Oregon into Central, and that's where things took an interesting twist.
Well, that's where the skies were the worst. It was like the skies there were so geoengineered. They were so flat and gray. And even though it was overcast, because of our experience with this work and looking at the skies for so long, I knew it was all chemtrails. I
Yep.
could tell. And it reminded me of when I lived there, when I didn't know about chemtrails back then, but we were getting chemtrailed every day. And I just saw it again with new eyes. I was like, oh my goodness, I lived under those chemtrails for so many years and wondered why I felt horrible all the time, wondered why I was exhausted and why everyone was angry all the time. And it all kind of comes together. So not only was the sky just incredibly flat and gray and geoengineered, but there were more cell towers than we had ever seen.
Oh, yeah.
Ever.
The
in our-
energy got worse and the sky got worse. It's a two-pronged effect.
And so people think it's all about chemtrails. The weather modification is all about chemtrails. It is partially, but the cell towers and the dangerous energy is so much more. And once you disable them, the chemtrails just disappear because the chemtrails can't persist when the atmosphere is healthy.
And this is the aspect that the Dane Wigingtons and the Michael Murphys are just not reporting on.
Well, nobody is, because they just report on the heavy metals, but the heavy metals themselves are that's just part of it. It's an energetic attack on our Earth, our atmosphere, on us. So what we noticed was, starting around Eugene, it was cell tower central. And I would throw a tower buster, and as soon as I threw one, there was another tower. So I started just loading up on tower busters, and we were throwing them almost rapid fire. There were more towers than I'd ever seen, and up through Salem, it was the same. And really, the skies kind of reminded me of what they look like in LA before we had done any work with orgonite.
Salem was horrible.
Well, Salem is horrible. No offense to anyone who lives in Salem, but I spent a good deal of time there, and the energy that I experienced there, it totally makes sense now, and I don't blame Oregon. I had this real problem, and I'd say, oh, I can't stand Oregon. It's such a horrible place. Well, I understand now that a lot of what was horrible was not Oregon's fault, but the state is just under such heavy energetic attack and is so economically oppressed and depressed, and it's just constantly under attack. So, we did what we could, and we drove up into the Portland area, and that was the end of that leg of the trip, because the next day we had a talk. I was speaking in Portland. I had a talk, and it was our event with Holly, who was on our show right before we left, and she did a talk too, and we had Brad Olson, and we did it was a really nice event in Lake Oswego, just south of Portland. So that was on the Saturday, and we took a little break from gifting, although we did gift on the way to the talk, because amazingly enough, a beautiful area like Lake Oswego, you can't believe how many towers are there.
Busted another 6 or 7 towers.
It's such a pretty place, and yet there's just cell towers everywhere. So we did the talk. The skies did transmute. They did change. I was able to point it out to people. And we met some really nice people there who've been following our work for some time. And I thought it was a beautiful event, because all these new folks got tower busters from us to take to their areas, including Wilsonville, Canby, Aurora, all these places in Oregon that I know that need it, that we didn't have time to get to.
Yeah, or that we just did on the freeway and didn't have time to go in depth for.
Yeah, there was somebody from Eugene who was going to go more in depth with the tower busters she got from us. There was a couple of nice people from Vancouver who are going to do more work up there. So it was really productive. And great to be able to teach people in that area that there are solutions to this chemtrail problem, because goodness knows the Northwest is totally bombarded, like California. Mm-hmm. It was kind of emotional for me to be back in Portland again, too. It was.
And the next day after the talk, we had the opportunity to, again, get up really early and take advantage of as much daylight or facsimile thereof as possible. And we saw the change right away in the morning. We saw it in the sky. The clouds were starting to form out of the muck. The transmutation process was still in the early stages, but we were starting to notice that it wasn't just the flat gray with no definition whatsoever, the kind of stuff that we were seeing in those places before, like Eugene and Salem.
Yeah, you can see pictures of this on my blog, too, on the kembo.tumblr.com. Portland was a major, major task, and it was extremely emotional for me. It was a sort of homecoming. I lived there from 2001 to 2009. Those were some very dark years for humanity. Those were the Bush years. Those were the Iraq war years, post 9/11 world. It was a very bleak time. So again, I can't fully blame Portland for my experiences of that time. I figure it would probably be pretty bad no matter where I lived. But Portland was pretty heavy, especially with all these energetic attacks and the violent, angry nature of the people there. And now I realize too, again, that was being agitated by these energies.
Mm-hmm.
But
certainly.
The skies in Portland did change as we gifted. And during our time there, we gifted about 200 cell towers. I would say, we probably busted about 200. We had allotted 200 orgonites for Portland alone. And we did some multiple bustings, which you can do to save ammo.
Yep, if the towers are clustered close together. If there's generally like 3 or less can get one tower buster piece, 1 3-ounce tower buster. But if there's more than 3, sometimes it's good to do two busters but that's pretty rare when there's more than 3 together. But we did see it.
The number of towers in Portland was also just unprecedented. It was like Bakersfield or San Bernardino plus. I was amazed. So we really went all out, and we did see changes. And the funny thing is the rain stopped while we were doing it, which is the opposite of what happens here in California, which is the rain starts.
The more towers you bust, the rain starts to fall heavier and heavier because it's not being suppressed. But our theory is that these towers are causing so much rain, so many of these rain clouds to rain out up there so that they dump all their moisture and don't have any left coming into California. So we like to joke that we're the board of equalization for weather
exactly.
in the region.
Well, Portland was heavy duty. We had downtown Portland was really bad energy. There's a lot of homeless people, a lot of poverty, a lot of noise, craziness, bicyclists yelling at motorists, some of the most ancient looking cell tower arrays I'd ever seen on building tops, similar to the stuff they have in Bakersfield. Towers that have been up there probably since the 70s or 80s, just emitting EMF over the whole downtown
And there
area.
have been towers up that long, in case anyone is having their mind blown right now. James DeMeo, in his book, The Orgone Accumulator Handbook, is the name of that book. That was written in 1989, and cell phone towers are mentioned in that book, as well as cell phones, because some people think that's a 90s thing. But there were these things around back then, and to see something that appears to be that old, whether or not it actually is,
it was old.
Some's been up for a long time.
There's this array in downtown Portland that really looked at least 30 years old. And I could feel it. And that was the interesting thing, too, is that I would get a little headache feeling before we saw a tower, and then we'd see a tower. So I'm starting to become more sensitive to where the towers are. I could start to feel them. It's taken me a long time of gifting to get to this point, but I'm starting to notice the different energy.
But you also did not get any of the chemtrail-related symptoms that we had gotten in Los Angeles before we started working with Oregon Energy, right?
Well, yeah, and that was a nice change, too. I didn't have any of those allergy symptoms or the exhaustion or any of that. So the symptoms I had that were related to falling heavy metals, that wasn't happening. So I know that what we were doing was helping, and the metals were not falling. And when you're gifting orgonite or using orgonite, it creates an upside down tornado effect. So the heavy metals are thrown away from the earth, so not falling down. And I know it was working. Otherwise, I would have felt really sick. I used to feel so ill that I wear a respirator on chemtrail days, and everybody thought I was insane. So now I know what we were doing was working.
And for any of the geoengineeringwatch.org people that are saying, well, but the metals were falling down in the rain. It was poison, toxic rain. No, That's not what happens when you work with orgone energy. When you saturate an area with these devices, those toxins are literally thrown into space. We've had Ken Rolla on our show. He's talked about it. We're going to talk about it some more, I'm sure.
Oh, he's coming back again too to talk with us. But the up in Oregon, it may be that some of those metals were falling with the rain, because what I noticed is that the rains are so strong up there that the geoengineering can't really completely stop them. So it's possible that they had been falling just as they had been falling just in the air in Los Angeles. But with the orgonite present, they're not falling. So thank goodness we don't have to breathe that anymore.
And they don't.
Yeah, I mean, Oregon really needs the help. And I think it's a different place now, actually. Holly sent a picture. I'm going to post on my blog to show what beautiful clean skies they're having now. And I got a report from one of the people in Vancouver, Washington, that came to our talk that said the skies have just been beautiful since we left.
Big puffy clouds.
So,
whereas previously it had just been, again, that flat, gray, undefined layer.
So I have a theory.
The low ceiling. Low ceiling is what you call it.
I called it the low ceiling back in 1996, the first time I went to Oregon, and I didn't even know what I was talking about. I didn't know about the DOR ceiling, but I said, there's something weird up there in the Northwest. There's a low ceiling. I feel like the sky is lower to the earth. I feel closed in, and now I know what it is, because they were geoengineering back then too. So I got this great picture from Holly, and I've gotten great reports. I have a theory that once this all is taken, well, it is taking effect, and our friends up there are going to be gifting even more, that it's not going to be gloomy between rains anymore, that the Northwest is going to be a lot nicer. It's going to be still rainy, but sunny in between rains, and hopefully this will help a little with that depressing feeling you get in the winter there, that I call it seasonal defective disorder. I know it's called seasonal affective disorder, but that's what I called it when I lived up there, because I was so depressed in the winter. There's just so little light up there. So any sunlight you can get is beneficial.
I mean, it's different in different neighborhoods, I noticed. Like, there are all these different boroughs of Portland, and I noticed quite a big difference from one area to the next.
What'd you think of my old neighborhood, St. John's and Northeast Portland? What'd you think?
Nothing to write home about.
Yeah, it wasn't too good, right? I lived in some pretty rough areas, really bad areas, in fact, crime neighborhoods. I mean, one of the reasons I left Portland was because I got broken into and had my stuff stolen when I lived in Northeast Portland. It's so violating to have your window, you come home, your window's shattered, your cats have been let out, your computer, your iPod, and your camera are gone. This guy literally fled our house on a bike. And in fact, I think I saw him as we were getting there, but I didn't realize what was going on. So it's pretty devastating to be robbed. I know this has happened to other people that I've talked to, and
at least he didn't take the cats.
Well, the cats were all let out. I'm so glad that I found them. But I had some bad experiences in Portland. I'm not going to lie about it. I'm not going to hide it. I lived in some really rough neighborhoods. I lived down the street from housing projects in St. John's, called the St. John's Woods. And I really dealt with just constant noise, screaming, graffiti, vandalism, littering, insanity. And what I remembered the most about St. John's and Northeast Portland was those days, those gray days that didn't rain. The gray days that didn't rain when people acted more crazy than usual. It's all just coming full circle for me now. Yeah. But, cleaning up the energy, it's just the beginning. It's not quite everything we need to do. There's so much more in Oregon that needs help. And I actually don't even know where to begin with the poverty and the bad education they're getting. And it's just, the whole place just needs an overhaul. And I don't know what to do.
Well, I think it goes back to that oppression you were talking about. I mean, there's oppression going on all sides of the spectrum. It's not just one segment of the population that's being oppressed and others are just having a grand old time. It's not that way.
Well, what I noticed was that as oppressed as the rural people are that are working for the lumber companies, cutting down trees and destroying their own beautiful environment, the urban people are also oppressed. It's kind of in a different way. The urban people, they really believe in Agenda 21. They don't know about what it is, but they really believe words like sustainable, mixed use, bike-friendly, walkable, these kinds of terms that are really just code for herding people into cities, getting them off the land, and keeping them under tight control. So the urban people are oppressed liberals, the rural people are oppressed conservatives, and everybody is completely under this tight control of this unseen hand. They love government. They want to be taken care of. Everybody there wants to be taken care of, it seems.
Yeah, well, that unseen hand is extending a very seen middle finger to a large segment of the population. And that's the problem with Agenda 21, is that if you're in that city, even if you don't know what's going on, you're being affected. You know, if they're tearing an old building down from the 1890s and you're so upset about it, but then immediately after your protest, you go into a Jamba Juice and you order a bunch of stuff, and then you go back to your high-rise building where you're living in a small cubicle with wireless everything, and then you eat some GMO food later that night. You're contributing to this problem.
Well, they're very, very complacent. And I've noticed this combination of the complacency and denial of what's going on around them is what makes Agenda 21 take its hold so firmly in Portland. That's in order to live in Portland and love Portland. Oh, I'm going to really upset the Portland fans here, but this is
Turn it off.
Well, this comes from years and years of living there. And I really wanted to like it, but in order to like Portland, you have to be in complete denial of the problems of the place. It's just not a free city. You can't live a normal life there. And there's just an energy. I don't know how else to put it. There's just this heavy energy over everything. And it's my hope that by busting all those towers that we lifted some of that energy and made it a little more of a livable place. But as it is right now, it's a very heavy place to be. And there's the sadness and the sorrow in the air. And, you know, that the last night in Portland, before we moved on to the next leg of our trip, we met somebody at a bar that we've known for a long time. And this bar was near 82nd Street. 82nd Street is one of my sad places. If you go look at my blog, I actually even captioned the photo of 82nd, one of my sad places in Portland. I got overcome. With emotion, standing out there in the rain, going back to the car at the corner of 81st, Southeast 81st and Stark, down in Mount Tabor area. And I was feeling just devastated. And Gabe was witness to this. I was overcome. It was the feeling. It was the cold. It was the rain, the smell of smoke, cigarette smoke, the smell of fried food. It was all these smells and feelings that just conjured up emotions from when I lived in Portland. And the rain in Portland is so cold, and it chills you to the bone. And there's no way out of that cold, even in your house. And the cold, it goes beyond the physical cold. It's an emotional cold. There's a void. I don't know how else to put it. It was just standing there at that corner. I think I felt the sadness of every living being in that city. And I was just overcome with emotion. It's a very, very sad place.
Well, we're going to talk more about that sadness when we come back an hour or two, in case that wasn't enough sadness for you.
It's going to get even sadder. Anyway, but Portland, there's much more to talk about with that place. This is a good chance for me to get it all out of my system.
Yes, it is. And it's also a good chance for me to remind people of our website, which is thechembow.com. That's TheChembow.com. And if you go to that website, you can find links to our blog and our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/thehumanfrequency. And you can find out about upcoming events, which there will not be any of until 2017. Believe you me. You've been listening to The Human Frequency. Please tune in for hour 2. Thank you.
Welcome back to The Human Frequency on American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio is listener supported, so please help us out by donating. You can just click on the donate button at AmericanFreedomRadio.com. I just left us on a very sad note. I was talking about how Portland made me so sad. And I'm not kidding and I'm not exaggerating. I lived there for 8 years. I was a musician there. Nobody wanted to listen to my music, which, by the way, that the opening theme of this show is my music. So it's not bad. It's not too bad, right, Gabe?
No,
It's pretty good, right?
it's wonderful.
It's pretty good.
It's wonderful music.
But nobody...
It's only second to the outro theme, which is my music.
Right.
But actually, the outro theme is my music that I did back around spring of 2012. And yeah, we both have our own music because that's what we did before we started getting into Organ Energy was we were musicians. I played keyboards and rhythm guitar, flute, and the bass guitar, and Sharon plays drums, bass, and a little bit of keyboards, and a little bit of guitar.
Drum programming. I did a lot of drum programming
That's right.
and singing. I did a lot of stuff. And production. I produced all our music. I engineered it.
And our fans are finding more and more about us every day.
But in Portland, Oregon, where I moved, because that's where young people go to retire, according to Portlandia, and it was absolutely true. That show is funny to me because there's a lot of truth in it. I moved up there in 2001 with my partner at the time, who was my musical partner, and we thought, this is great because rents in LA are going up. Let's move somewhere cheaper. We could do music all the time and work 20 hours a week and get by. But what we found when we moved there was that nobody cared about anyone's music. Everyone just wanted to be famous. And it was very cutthroat. There was no real community in the music scene. And it was very, very sad for us. So we did music for a few years, then quit for a little while, and then got back into it again. But it never really panned out living in Portland. But I will say that the wet, rainy, depressing climate was very good for us as a place to develop our talents. And we were noticing, Gabe and I, parallels between the Northwestern music and the music of England. And it really...
And not even of a specific era either. Like, of all eras, from 50s to 90s, would elicit the same parallels. Let's talk about some of that.
Well, yeah. And we were listening to a lot of Smiths while we were up in the Northwest. And Morrissey's lyrics are about England, but they may as well be about the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, England in the 1970s was his bread and butter, and he sang about that in the 80s with the Smiths and on into the 90s when he went on his solo career after the Smiths. And we of course the Smiths only had 4 albums, but he really succinctly gets down that feeling of being in that gray atmosphere and being surrounded by the sounds and the sights and the smells of... I can't really peg a single word on it, but again, it's very similar to what you experienced.
Well, I was having an emotional breakdown essentially at the corner of 81st and Stark.
In the pouring rain.
At and
like
the cold and the dark.
11 p.m.
And I was devastated. And it was the sounds, it was the sights, the smells, the feeling of that just chilling rain that just chills you to your core. There's such a loneliness, such a sorrow. And it's not just my sorrow, it's the sorrow of everyone there. And Morrissey captures that feeling in England. I really think that England and Oregon are almost the same place when I listen to his music.
Yeah.
You know,
every day is like Sunday. Well, that was...
He may as well be singing about Cannon Beach.
Yeah. Every day is silent and gray.
It's Cannon Beach, Oregon. The idea of a
coastal... a postcard, how I dearly wish I was not here.
I know.
Well, that was post-Smiths. That was a solo career. But
it all comes together. It's all the same.
Yeah, it's the same thing. And during the Smiths... on their second album, Meat is Murder, there's a song called Nowhere Fast, where he references when a train goes by, such a sad sound. It's such a sad thing. And when we were on our gifting, we passed a set of train tracks more than once, more than twice, I think. We came across
the one on Columbia Boulevard. The one on it was Columbia Boulevard when we were going to St. John's. And I've passed those train tracks many, many times when I lived in that area.
And of course, there were 2 towers right there. But just looking in the rain, or perhaps the rain had just stopped at that point, but looking out there in the gray and the cold and seeing 3, 4, 5, whatever sets of tracks all just kind of merging together, and going far off you could see the tunnel and you could see the tracks going in there, and I would only think, heaven knows what has gone on in that tunnel.
Oh, there's been a lot of terrible crimes and abuses against humanity in Portland. I mean, there was a slave trade, an underground slave trade, where Chinese immigrants were smuggled under the city of Portland through tunnels. It's crazy history there. It's a depraved city. There's a more strip clubs per capita in Portland than any other city in the United States. And I don't have any problem with stripping, but it just gives a little bit of an idea of where the people's heads are at. And there's a lot of sex shops too, by the way, everywhere. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I am saying there's an inordinate number of them for the population, and it does tell you where people's heads are at. There's so much loneliness. It's almost impossible to make a friend in Portland. I did make some friends in Portland. Everybody I made friends with left as soon as possible.
And then you had to make other friends because those friends were gone.
Well, all my friends were in Seattle after that. And then I'd go
I
up to Seattle and visit them because I found Seattle, and they probably also felt the same way as me. Seattle was a much more civilized city. Washington has a little more to offer than Oregon. And there's more going on culturally in Seattle than in Portland. And that is... when I say there's more going on culturally there, that's a real understatement. Anyway, that I did notice this, the Nowhere Fast lyrics that you're talking about. I know, I mean, I've been listening to that song for like 20 years. And
also the Lazy Sunbathers.
Oh, yeah.
From his 1994 album Vauxhall and I, there's a track called The Lazy Sunbathers where he talks about these... I always loved the part where he says, nothing appears to be between the ears of the lazy sunbathers. And then he says, too jaded to question stagnation.
And there you go. That's the Portland hipster. That's in a nutshell. The Portland hipster who will not even look around to see how nothing is going on. It's just the same for years and years. I went back, I left 7 years ago and I go back. It's the same place. Nothing has changed. And I would say it was slightly better, maybe slightly better energetically, but it still was terrible. But when we were thinking about the Nowhere Fast lyrics, we were listening to that song on the trip. The way that he says when a train goes by, it's such a sad sound. It's such a sad thing. That is what he's doing, is he's taking a sound that he's heard many times, and it's linked up with an emotion, sort of like you have a smell, like the smell of cookies or something baking, that makes you think of home or makes you think of your mother, or the sound of the train makes him think of something that he has experienced over and over again. The trains are cyclical. They go by again and again through the day. And the way that he thought about that train sound linking up with certain emotions is exactly how the cold rain in the deep southeast of Portland affected me that night.
Well, he does more than just link it up. I mean, you could be on a beach in Bermuda in the middle of summer and listen to that lyric, and you'll be in England under a gray sky watching a train go by and smelling the coal ash as it goes through the tunnel.
Which is not part of chemtrails.
Yeah.
By the way.
Thank you.
How many times have I gotten those emails about the coal ash?
Yeah, it's I don't mean to offend anyone. It's really annoying.
That's okay. But you're right. Morrissey is an absolute genius. And a lyrical genius. He's an extremely emotional man. He's able to convey this all through music in a beautiful way that I don't think that any musician nowadays could do. Mm-hmm. Even he can't do it anymore. But he's an older man.
Yeah.
He's an old man now.
Well, he has countless lyrics, not just from his tenure in the Smiths in the 80s to the first part of his solo career, which went from 88 to 97, and then he came back maybe 7 years later. Yeah, 7 years later in 2004, and it's I know this is just my opinion, but I don't find the stuff as good as his earlier stuff.
It's not humanly possible to do good music now.
Mm-hmm.
Ever since they killed Kurt, back in 94, it has not been really possible to do good music. There's been a few anomalies and exceptions to that, but effectively the parasitic elite killed rock and roll when they killed Kurt Cobain in 1994 via his handler Courtney Love.
Well, it was a long, slow death that started long before that, but that was just kind of the culmination point, I think, where it's like, okay, it's over now. Now it's just, you know, Blink 182 and Sum 41 and Good Charlotte, and everyone's taste just goes down the toilet.
You have just mentioned the bands that were popular when I moved to Portland.
I must be clairvoyant.
It's just so pathetic. Another artist that we enjoyed on our trip was Nicholas Solomon, whose band is called the Beavis Frond, or the Bevis Frond, and this is extremely unknown.
Hey Beavis, check it out.
Yeah, it's cool. This music is amazing. This guy is a completely unrecognized genius. I learned about his music through Mary Lou Lord, who was an artist that I used to enjoy on the Kill Rock Stars label back in the 90s. One of the only good bands on the Kill Rock Stars, her and Sleater Kinney. And she did a couple of covers of his music, and it took me years to actually listen to his music. It's called the Beavis Frond, Bevis Frond. Okay. And his name is Nicholas Solomon. This guy is an absolute musical genius. And the interesting thing is he is from England, and his music sounds like it's from Seattle. It sounds like it's from Washington. So this is another interesting parallel, how these music genres are the same from place to place because of that same wet, depressing, cold climate.
And it could also sound like it came from psychedelia in England in 1966.
Well, but he's of that generation.
I know.
So he's of the 60s
English
generation.
guys sitting around in a flat. It's pouring rain outside. They got nothing to do. There's no jobs, so they're just sitting there. What do you have to do besides plug in a guitar or pick up an acoustic one that you can't plug in and just create? That's just it. It was a time and a place, and these people had the time to do that, and they had the atmosphere, the same atmosphere, and they put it into their music.
Well, his music is absolutely genius. His guitar work is top notch. He's got to be one of my favorite guitarists, other than the guitarist I used to play with when I was in Bum Tech, who was my ex and a really great guitarist. But out in the world of guitarists, Nicholas Solomon is just the best. And I remember seeing a comment on one of the videos of his music on YouTube where someone referred to him as Dinosaur Senior. And that says it all. I mean, this guy is like the father of that whole genre, and nobody even knows about him. So I really encourage you, I hope I'm putting a good plug out there. Please check out his amazing, beautiful music. You can listen to it all on YouTube.
And why don't you quickly explain Dinosaur Jr. for the people who may not be familiar with them?
Dinosaur Jr. They're one of those grunge bands from the 90s. I'm not like a huge Dinosaur Jr. Listener, but they're one of the good bands of the 90s. And the Beavis Frond's music is just the influence of that genre of music. It's great guitar music, more emotional than anything you'll hear nowadays. And you know, the 90s were kind of the last hurrah for rock and roll.
The beginning of the end.
It was the beginning of the end.
Much like the sign that that was at the protests in Portland, that unbeknownst to us were actually going on simultaneously as we were gifting orgonite in the city.
So while we were gifting orgonite in Portland, was actually that night, the night before and the night of our gifting, there were Trump protests in Portland, reported in the Oregonian, and interestingly enough, the Oregonian's news story on this is just a series of tweets, as testament to the excellent journalism that I enjoyed while living in Oregon. Yeah. But there were some protest signs, people who really think that it makes a difference whether Trump or Hillary is president, people who really don't realize that the United States is a corporation and that the president of the United States is about as important as the president of Walmart.
That's true.
But I will have to say that a couple of the highlights of these protest signs was one that said the beginning of the end, and another one where a guy is just holding up a picture of the dude from The Big Lebowski, and it says the dude abides. And he's totally laughing, and his friend's totally laughing. So I'm glad some people aren't taking it too seriously.
Shomer Shabbos.
I don't roll on Shabbos. And apparently 71 people were arrested at the protests on Saturday night by Portland police. These police in Portland are very militarized, and our host driving, when we were staying in Portland, was driving with his son through Portland and pointed out to his son these militarized police. I didn't see them because we weren't in that part of Portland, fortunately, while this was happening, but they are in full riot gear. They're ready for a confrontation. You've got this volatile combination of just psychotic, liberal, insane people who really think that it matters who's the president of the United States Incorporated, and psychotic, insane Portland police. Everybody is zapped out of their minds from the cell tower arrays. And
especially that one from like 1975 or whatever it was.
I mean, this city is psychotic. I'm so glad I don't live there anymore. But
well, I mean, when we were in downtown and you were getting agitated just being there, I imagine what those people were going through. They were getting the same.
Do you realize that we parked our car near where they do the Sunday market with the hippies and the arts and crafts and the terrible music? And there was all these homeless people. It just doesn't seem safe. It's noisy. It's chaotic.
The hippies. Sorry, we're like offending people left and right tonight.
I'm sorry.
I guess that's just what we do.
We just offend.
This is another.
We are here to offend.
Another typical episode of the Human Frequency. Thank you for listening.
I guess we can let's get out of Portland.
Yes.
Let's move on.
Let's leave.
Let's leave Portland now forever and ever.
Let's go to the coastal town that they forgot to close down. Another Morrissey.
You mean
lyric.
Cannon Beach?
Yes.
Or Newport.
Or any of those towns.
They're all the same, and it's just like England. And actually, I was reading your Smith's lyrics book of the analysis of Call Dropped.
Gee, what a shock, the call dropped.
Okay, so we're back. Sorry about that, our call dropped. Anyway, we were just leaving Portland, Oregon, thank goodness.
Yes.
And we're about...
Mercy, finally.
Anyway, so we left Portland, Oregon, and we drove out through Beaverton, did some more tower busting, and we went out to the coast on the 26, Highway 26. And so we were hitting some new territory with our tower busting, and I think I was talking about Smith's lyrics before we dropped.
Because I mentioned a coastal town that they forgot to close down.
Right, and that seems like all of them. And you know what? This is what I was going to talk about. In that book that we have of the analysis of Smith's lyrics, it mentioned how Morrissey thought it was preposterous that there would be a resort town in England. How could you have a resort town in England? It's just dreary and gray and cold. So that's how the towns are on the Oregon coast. It's tourist towns, but it's just this dreary environment. Anyway, we went out there, and on the way to the coast, it is actually more dreary than the coast itself. We went through these kind of backwoods areas, and I gotta say, there was some weird stuff going on in those shacks out there in the woods.
We passed many of them where you look at the house and it's like the train tunnel. You just shudder to think what's going on in there.
Well, I had a really bad feeling about these houses. I gotta say, I think that there was some really dark stuff. I think incest and people having sex with people they shouldn't be. And I don't want to get, too graphic or too gross, but I'm very empathic. And when we passed by these houses, I got this terrible, terrible feeling of incest.
Nor do we want to assume that that's taking place in all of these houses.
Well, yeah.
However, we cannot discount these feelings that we have, these intuitive feelings when we pass certain places. Sometimes you just get a vibe, and it's as simple as that.
Well, I got a vibe, and then when we got to Tillamook, we went into the Fred Meyer to get something to eat, and the people in that Fred Meyer were testament to what I thought was going on in that house.
I shouldn't be laughing.
No, but it's terrible. And I don't mean to be a terrible person, but there were people there that did not look like any other human beings I'd ever seen in my life, and quite a lot of them. It was like a different animal than you or I, and I don't know where they came from, except I have certain ideas, and I think it had something to do with what was going on in those houses.
Well, we did see some good stuff.
Yeah, on the plus side, we learned about something we call the Hundredth Bovine effect,
yep.
Which is it's a piece of good news for cattle everywhere.
So if you are a cow and you're listening to American Freedom Radio tonight, listen up.
All right, so you're going to learn something. Recently, I've noticed cows sitting instead of standing in fields. And not just cows. This extends to goats, sheep, and llamas. Many, many animals I've seen recently are sitting down, not standing.
When they previously were standing.
They were always standing.
And it's a wise decision because it's more energy efficient, it's more relaxing. You can see more of the flora and fauna that's going on in the grass, the little bugs and whatnot. And you're not as high up, and therefore not as maybe not as noticeable to carnivorous predators.
Well, I think this is great news for cattle everywhere. I noticed it's starting with the llama in our community that we always watch when we drive by. And this llama's been sitting lately, and I guess the memo's gotten out because everywhere we went on our trip, we saw all types of farm animals enjoying a good sit.
Where previously they were standing. So, yes, the 100th bovine effect. It is official, and I'm sure in a few days Wikipedia will put out an article that completely disputes it and says it doesn't exist.
It will debunk it.
That's right, debunk. I should know.
But the going out to the Oregon coast was a very difficult drive and very, very dangerous weather conditions. So we were out there and we passed a place called Cape Foul Weather, which is very aptly named. And we passed there at night. It was at the end of our trip. We were trying to get to Newport, which is where we were going to stop for the night. And you could barely see a few feet ahead of us. But interestingly enough, we looked up Cape Foul Weather later, and this is one of those giant tree stumps. And we saw a lot of giant tree stumps on the coast. And according to Wikipedia, it is a basalt outcropping. They call it shag rocks. And anything called basalt, they're saying this is volcanic rock that somehow raised out of the earth. It's like the lava raised up, froze in the shape of a tree trunk, and just stuck there. So this Cape Foul Weather was yet another one of these giant tree stumps that we were driving on the Oregon coast.
This sounds a lot like the Bill Hicks skits of the early 90s when he's mockingly doing his impression of the mainstream media talking about what happened on the day of the Kennedy assassination. And it's so absurd and convoluted, and go back to bed, America. Right. Your government is in control again. We have it all figured out. Go back to bed. Well, they'll just say whatever they have to explain it.
Well, they have a picture of melting lava right above the picture of the basalt cliffs, and the melting lava is just it's a massive molten material. It doesn't make these cliffs.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was one of many tree stumps we went by on the coast. We saw others. I saw another one that was really, really stark against the gray backdrop. There were all these rocks. On the Oregon coast, there are all these rocks.
And some of them you're driving around. You're physically driving around the trunk itself. You can see it in the landscape to your left and the ocean on your right as you're curving around. What is this gigantic tree trunk?
Mm-hmm. You could see it. It looks like it. But out in the ocean, they're just kind of ragged rocks at this point, or that's what they look like. But then when you really know when you know about the giant trees, you see the stump shapes. And one of the saddest ones to me was this just tiny little tree just hanging on for dear life on this rock amidst the pounding waves and the driving wind and the pouring rain. It's a very harsh environment out there.
Oh, yeah. And the trees that remain, they don't have it easy by any stretch.
No, those ones that are completely flat.
Oh, yeah. They're getting buffeted by winds constantly. It's pretty brutal out there. But anyway, we had a little storm going into Newport with just pea soup fog and just huge downpour. Very difficult to see, very difficult to drive. But we made it into Newport safely. We stayed the night. And then the next morning, this was our reward.
Well, our reward was the beautiful skies. I'd never seen skies like that in Oregon in all the years I'd lived there. It was just a breathtaking display. Golden light, just shimmering, beautiful, puffy clouds, deep, deep blue skies. The landscape was rejoicing, and the birds were rejoicing, and this was our reward for the torture of the day before, because the drive out of Portland, Gifting Portland was very difficult, by the way, driving back and forth, back and forth. I was like the Uber driver for Team Kembo. I know that city inside out. And then driving out to the coast through those terrible weather conditions, it was very difficult. So our reward came that day when we drove down to Arcata. And that's where we stayed that night. So we made it all the way down there. And we were gifting every few miles. If we didn't see a cell tower, we were chucking anyway. So what we've done is we've effectively disabled about 1,000 miles of cell towers along the coastline, and in between those towers there's more orgonite too, so we did a major job.
Yeah, we just kept the line going all the way down, all the way, and we did come across plenty of towers, though. Don't get don't get us wrong.
Oh, here's another interesting point, was down in Brookings, Oregon, which is when you're getting down near the California border. Brookings, Oregon is a town with a population of about 6,500 people. And we busted about, what do you say, 10 towers?
I would say a dozen.
A dozen towers.
10 is a conservative estimate.
This town had a lot of cell towers. And we were very surprised to see this many for such a small town. What I realized more and more is that the cell towers are actually not for cell service. These are weather warfare weaponry. And they're put up there to stop rain.
And the mind controlling of the humans is just like an added benefit of it, almost incidental to it, maybe.
So Brookings, Oregon, a population of 6,500, why do they need so many cell towers? I feel that it's a strategic location in the weather war. I feel that it's being done to stop rain. And in Portland, when I had my phone on, which wasn't a lot, but whenever I did, I had 2 or 3 bars of T-Mobile service despite all the towers. So that's leading me to believe that the towers are not really what they say they're for.
Was a strategic location in the weather
well,
war,
yeah, it's all busted
and
now.
It is not anymore.
Mm-hmm. It's all busted now. And while we were going down the coast, we encountered the heaviest rain I've ever experienced in my entire life.
Mine too.
It was crazy. We were just unleashing it. We were just breaking down the frequency fence everywhere we went. And it was a wondrous thing. And we went through.
As soon as we hit California, though, it was
what a relief. I was so happy to be out of Oregon.
We have made it.
Gabe and I are Californians. We really love our state, and it's nice to be home. But, it was very satisfying busting all those towers in Oregon. We went into Ukiah, and we had some deli food at a Jewish deli in Ukiah, of all places. And there was another Trump rally there, of all things.
I like the Jewish deli.
Schatz.
Yeah, which fortunately did not live up to its name.
They had vegetarian food. I was happy. So that was nice. And yes, there was another anti-Trump rally. People who think that it really matters who the president is. But the skies were so beautiful in Ukiah. I've got pictures of this on the site. You can check it out. It was such a great time.
Yeah.
So even with the anti-Trump rally making me want to leave town,
which we did.
Well, we did after lunch.
Yes. And then we moved into Arcata, which is near Eureka, a little further down, and that was our stop for the night.
I feel like I'm all going out of order, though. I don't remember when we were in Ukiah and when we were in Arcata. I think it's all
Ukiah was first. I don't
remember.
Then Arcata, where we observed another interesting phenomenon.
The 100th hippie effect. So the hotel we stayed at in Arcata had these...
Tell us, please.
Yes, it had a lot of bright light bulbs. It's very hard to sleep with all these bright lights outside of the rooms. So I unscrewed our light bulb, and I unscrewed the next door neighbor's light bulb. And it was nice and dark. And then I looked and I said, I wish that one was unscrewed too. But I didn't do it because I didn't want to get too involved in other people's business. The next morning, I woke up and that one had been unscrewed too. So,
and it was very early, so they were still on, because they're all on a timer.
Yeah. And I realized that I may have willed it to turn off, but I think what actually happened was the 100th hippie effect was that somebody saw me unscrew the light bulb, or saw that it was unscrewed and realized they could do it too. Because nobody wants to sleep with that much light. So that was pretty cool. So we had the 100th bovine effect, 100th hippie effect.
And who knows what we'll see next time.
Anyway, all in all, it was a great trip. We went to many, many amazing places, interesting landscapes, many, many giant tree stumps. We saw the giant redwoods, which are the descendants of the ancient trees. Mm-hmm. And I felt very, very in tune with the environment in a way that I never had before. I felt like we were really getting involved in participating in our world. And I think that more and more people are doing this now because there were several towers that had birds on them, which means if this cell tower has birds, someone's already busted it. So I know that we're not the only ones, and seeing the work that NorCal Weather Warrior did in Stockton showed me that it wasn't just us doing it. And I knew she was, but it was so wonderful to see that proof. That was a lot of busting.
Yeah, a lot of throwing, a lot of driving, a lot of miles put on.
About 500 Towerbusters.
Yep.
500 Towerbusters distributed, and this is all thanks to our generous donations that our supporters have helped us with in order to produce this many Towerbusters, which is no small feat. They're not, it takes a long time to make this many.
And Portland, thoroughly inundated with Towerbusters, gifted, not completely, but we did a lot, and the effects will start to be really seen and understood in the coming weeks as the rainy season progresses.
Well, in the wake of this gifting, so we're done now. We're back home. We're taking a little time off, and in the wake of this massive orgonite gifting, we've seen just rainstorm after rainstorm pummeling the entire West Coast top to bottom, Washington to Baja California, the whole thing. So I know that this is helping, and that was my theory, is that we could break down the entire frequency fence by doing this. And we have one little piece left to do in California, which is between LA and San Diego. We've done inland in those areas, but just not the coast. So it's going really well. And we've got Holly up north, who is our new team member who's been doing some gifting.
Holly Marie, a living woman.
Holly Marie is a living woman. I'm happy to say it. She's been on our show twice, and she went by a different name on those shows. You could see it in the archives. She does great work with helping people to heal their traumas and move on with their lives. And she's now applying that knowledge into healing the land and healing everybody, collective healing. So she's now a new etheric warrior on our team, doing great work up in Oregon. I'm so happy. She sent me a picture. It's great to see what she's doing up there. And yes, she's now a living woman. She's a great speaker too. I recommend checking out sacredheartascension.com, which is her website.
And the more people that choose, that make that decision, that take the personal responsibility, to take the time to make those choices, to say, just like the people in logging country, I don't have to do this. There's an alternative. And they choose to start helping and start healing rather than to keep destroying and stick with the old paradigm that is on its way out. And we're seeing more and more evidence of this each day. And this gifting, we had a feeling beforehand, was going to be a huge blow to the death matrix, and we're already seeing evidence that it most certainly is that and more.
Last night I couldn't sleep, and that doesn't happen often these days. And I know I was looking at what happened this morning. I realized what was going on because I woke up at about 5:30 and I just couldn't get back to sleep. When we woke up this morning, the skies were completely covered in clouds. It had been raining. It was foggy. It was beautiful. And I realized what was going on. They were hitting with very, very extreme energy to try to stop the rain. And that will keep a person from sleeping because the same energy that is affecting the atmosphere is affecting us. So that's...
And it's harmful to both.
Right. But likewise, orgone energy is beneficial to both. So I had this horrible, horrible sleep last night and bad dreams, and that doesn't happen very often. And sure enough, they were trying to suppress the rain. And that explains a lot because they were chemtrailing a lot yesterday. But again, I've heard not only did our chemtrails disappear, but I got a good report this evening from Riverside County that their chemtrails were disappearing as they were spraying yesterday. So
which has been gifted over in those stretches. Again, not everything. People still have work that they need to do. But the idea is the more, the better. And the more towers that are gifted, the weaker the death matrix is, and the faster these changes we'll start to see.
And you know what? Feel free to send me your pictures to fakeclouds@thechembo.com, fakeclouds@thechembow.com, because I love seeing what's going on in your community, especially you orgonite makers and gifters out there. Please send me pictures of what's going on, and I'll post them on my blog.
And please direct all hate mail, complaints, grievances, what have you, to my email, which is blueskies@thekembo.com. Anything.
Thank you.
All of the Russian bride spam, anything can just go directly to me. But do not send that to Fake Clouds. Send that to blueskies@thekembo.com.
Thank you, Gabe. Yeah, but I do look forward to hearing from you and seeing what's going on in your area, because I can't be everywhere, but I want to know. And our website, again, is thekembo.com. Keep up with us for news on the weather war in California and beyond. Now we've done a lot in Oregon. We're going to be moving on into Washington soon. We're very excited. We're going to be back up in Oregon probably again in May to crash the summit.
Let's not blow the lid off that one just yet. Any more that's already been done. But
Yeah.
we will be going onward and upward with our travels and our gifting, because there's always cell towers to bust, no matter where you are. A lot of people say, oh, they chemtrail here more than anywhere else.
They chemtrail everywhere.
Not the case. And some other people say that there's no chemtrails in Costa Rica.
I think there's
guarantee
chemtrails
you
everywhere.
that is not the case. I have not been to Costa Rica, but there are chemtrails everywhere. There are cell towers everywhere. And fortunately, there are orgonite gifters everywhere. There are people who think outside of the box everywhere, and they want to make us feel like we're alone, but we are not, because there are people who think critically, who do not just accept what they're told. There are people who are changing the timeline everywhere. They exist everywhere, and it's starting to become more noticeable when these effects take place, because they're on such a widespread scale. Well, we've seen the 100th bovine effect, the 100th monkey effect, the 100th hippie effect. What's next? The 100th gifter effect.
I hope so. We are literally shifting the timeline. I knew when we went up north that we would be making a great, great change. And it's very exciting to take our world back and realize that we are all living men and women, infinitely powerful creators of our world. Let's take back our world. Let's eliminate the parasitic influence and gift your world with orgonite and use your power of prayer and good energy. And I know that good energy sounds simple, but it is very, very effective.
That's right.
Good wishes towards each other. And happy Thanksgiving to everyone as well.
Indeed. You've been listening to The Human Frequency on American Freedom Radio. Please tune in next time. Thank you and have a good night.